Hi, I'm George Tekmitchov here with Steve the
Big Cat
Anderson, and we're back for another Easton podcast. This time it's Q&A for the indoor season. We got our podcast email up and running, Steve, and it's podcast@eastontp.com. And in our first episode, we mentioned that if you sent in your question and we answered it on the podcast, that you'd get a dozen Easton arrows, which are going to go to Mr. Sami Anttila of Finland. He's asked for some fat boys, and I think he's probably got them by now.
Good deal.
Yeah, but here's his question, and I think it's a good one. And here's what he's asking. I'll just read it verbatim. I'd like to hear your opinion on using aluminum arrows for indoor shooting, especially with recurve bow. Last winter, I used Easton XX75 Platinum Plus arrows, and I really liked them, but most people here in Finland shoot the same carbon aluminum composite arrows throughout the year. Some people say aluminum arrows are harder to tune and that there won't be any real benefit of using them. I've also heard that an aluminum arrow can be more unforgiving and you'll lose the touch to your summer arrows by using different arrows in winter. What are your thoughts? Well, that's a very good question because it does come up almost every generation. You've got shooters debating this particular question. So I'm going to, Steve, if you don't mind, I'll just relate what I think, and then I want to hear what you think. Because I want to hear from the compound perspective as well.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so on the recurve side, back in 1978, 79, Darrell Pace addressed this, the great Darrell Pace, one of the greatest archers ever. Darrell changed up his weight as well as his arrow. He would go to aluminum 2114 indoors because it tuned, and he'd drop about 3 pounds or so. Now, at the time, shooters were shooting 50, 51, 52 pounds. And you kind of needed a break. You know, it was kind of unhealthy to shoot that weight all the way through the year. So Darrell, very sensibly, chose to drop weight. And then with the advent of carbon arrows, we saw gradual decline in the mass weight, I should say the pull weight, and a decline in the mass weight, of course, of the arrow. So the pull weight correspondingly decreased, and by the mid-90s to the late 90s, going into the mid-2000s, say around 2004, 2005, men's, in general, weights were around 47 to 49 rather than 50 to 53. This is a general statement here. And as a result, you saw more people not trying to change up going into indoor season. You saw them keeping the same arrow. Now, the people who were probably most famous for this were the Koreans and some of the Italians who would continue to shoot their X10s and ACEs indoors, and as a result, most of the indoor world records with the recurve are actually held with X10s. With that said, though, I think that there can be, especially if you're not a super high-level shooter, some benefit to going to a line-catching arrow, like a 23 sized aluminum or correctly spined aluminum, whatever that may be for you, and that there may be some benefit to that. And also, the question from Sammy questioned whether you might lose your feel. I don't think so. Darrell was able to go, and of course he's Darrell Pace, mind you. He was able to change weight and arrow, and within a day or so he'd be back to where he was. If you practice enough, it's not a big deal. Give it a couple weeks, and I'm sure that an intermediate level shooter can get back to the feel, and in fact may actually improve. So the general advice is, if you're an intermediate level shooter, absolutely try something that might be a better arrow from the standpoint of tune and line catching, but never sacrifice tune, is my opinion. Don't try to make a big fat arrow work just for the sake of shooting a fat arrow. You'll be better off having the correct tune, no matter whether you choose an aluminum or carbon arrow. So that's more or less my opinion regarding recurve. But Steve, I know that with the compound, it's different.
Yeah, with the compound, we're all shooting big arrows indoors. We're all generally shooting max diameter. So shooting World Archery events, it's a 23 diameter. Coming across the pond for an NFAA event like Vegas, it's a 27 diameter. And you see the guys in the U.S. pretty much stick to the 27s only. We don't shoot nearly as much World Archery type stuff. So guys will change from 27s to 23s for a tournament or two, and that's about it. Whereas the Europeans, they're shooting 23s the whole year, and they change to 27s for a tournament or two. So I think you kind of got to go with what works the best in that scenario. As George said with recurve, whatever tunes the best is what you should be shooting. Diameter's great, but the arrow that shoots the tightest and groups the best is king. So I shot next to PJ Deloche this year at Vegas, and he shot his first 2 days with 27s, and he shot good scores, but it wasn't the X count he was accustomed to. And he switched to his 23s for the Indoor World Cup final on Saturday night and just left them for the round on Sunday. He shot a perfect 30X game. And what he mentioned to me was that's probably just a component of, he spends more time tuning his 23s than he does his 27s because he uses them all year long. Whereas for me, I spend more time tuning my 27s. I shot a perfect 30X game the day prior with a 27. And, I've got bows. I've had bows where I've been able to work both the 23 and 27, but far and away, you got to use the one that works the best for you. And I think if you're shooting great with 23s, why make the switch? Sometimes diameter helps. Sometimes it doesn't group as well if you don't have time to get it to tune right. I think anyone can get a 27-12 to tune, but it does take some time. It takes some experimenting. So you got to do what you got to do with the amount of time you have to get a bow ready.
So if you're an American shooter and you're shooting primarily in the United States, tournaments like the Lancaster Classic, tournaments like Vegas, then maybe it's worth taking the time to set up the 27s. But if you're a European shooter, probably you're best off getting the best tune you can with your 23s because, as PJ showed, it's possible to shoot perfect scores without the extra line catching capability of the 27.
Yeah, and if you can do a 27, make it work, more power to you because that diameter does help at Vegas.
But that and Lancaster are about the only place, plus some NFAA events, that you can use those. Yeah, you can't use them in Europe.
If you're a European, that's the only time you're going to be using them. So you kind of got to pick your battles there. If you're a shorter draw length especially, then going more towards the 23-12, something like that is going to be your best bet. I thankfully can break down about anything 27-12 with my draw length, but it's it's the best tuning arrow you can get out of your bow. You only have 20 yards for that arrow to correct itself. So vane helps, point weight helps. There's a lot of experimenting you can do, especially with length. When I set up a 27-12, I start with them at about 32 inches, and I cut about a quarter inch off. I try different point weights, usually 250, 275, 300, see what works best. With the 23, I do the same thing, but I cut it to about 31 inches to start. My personal setup for the last couple of years with 23-15 has been 30 and a quarter inch shaft length and then a 180 grain point, whereas with a 27-12, I'm at about 31 and a half, 32 inch shaft length and a 250 grain point. So you gotta experiment. You can get them both to work out of a compound. It's just a matter of taking the time, buying the components. I know points aren't cheap. You pick up a pack of points, 40 euros, whatever they might be, and you might not use them all, but if you're spending $120 on 3 different point weights to experiment with what shoots the best, what is $120 in relation to a plane ticket to Vegas, So to me, it's worth it. I like to try different stuff and see what works best. I know with recurve, it's a whole different ball game, George, but on the compound side, if I can make a max diameter shaft work, that's what I'm going to go with.
Well, speaking of max diameter shafts, we are now about to introduce a new product just for this season. It's a special anniversary edition X7 arrow. It's the 50th anniversary, which is amazing. It's just mind-blowing. For 50 years, people have been winning tournaments with X7s. And you can use the same – if you picked out a 2114 X7 today and you picked out a 2114 X7 in 1965, they would shoot exactly the same. That's really amazing.
That's some material properties of aluminum, and that's what I preach to shooters with our outdoor arrows, our AC arrows like the X10, ACC, ACE. There's huge advantages to building a carbon arrow around an aluminum core.
And the aluminum material itself has basically been the same since that time. So, this is maybe the only sporting goods item that you can look at that continues to win today unchanged essentially. I mean, it's different colors and stuff, but
Colors and labels.
it's the same dimensions, the same formula, and the same secret Easton processes as were developed by Jim Easton in 1964, 1965 being the first competitive season for the X7 arrows. Back then they were silver colored. They were anodized. They were the first anodized arrow of the time, and they were sandblasted with the size of the arrow. That was a sandblast process that was used to put the number on the arrow shaft. So it was pretty remarkable that after 50 years, that arrow is still winning just about everything indoors today.
Yeah, that's a testament. And, I'm shooting them now. I don't know when we'll have something else that I might shoot instead. That's kind of crazy to think.
We've done a special limited edition of the X7. It's silver in the front, like an X23, X27, and it's gold in the back. And it is laser engraved with a special 50th anniversary crest, Jim Easton's signature, and his son Greg Easton's signature bookending the crest. So they're one-of-a-kind collector's items, obviously available in dozens, meant to be shot, absolutely meant to be used, and available at your Easton dealer in the next few weeks on a limited basis. So once they're gone, they're gone. We're running limited numbers in each size of existing X23 and X27 so that people have them for the indoor season.
Yeah, it'll be cool to see some gold X23s and X27s sticking out of quivers this year. It's a really sharp look. I've, luckily been able to see them and be with George as we approve the final design, and they look great. They really do. And
we're going to have some special promotional things going on at the Vegas shoot and some other tournaments for sort of a commemoration of anybody shooting X7 arrows. There will be some special prizes available. It doesn't matter if it's the anniversary model or not. If it's an X7, if it's an Easton aluminum arrow, you're part of the celebration of 50 years of X7 excellence, and we're really very proud to bring that to you.
50 years of X7 excellence and the 50th year of the Vegas shoot. So
yeah,
it goes
exactly.
Hand in hand.
That's a good point, Steve. It's the 50th anniversary of both of those great things, the Vegas shoot itself. I know it sounds a little early to be talking about the Vegas shoot, but why not start getting ready,
It'll be here before we know it. I mean, for us, we do new product launch in October, and then it's a whirlwind until ATA show. Then we're on the road, Nîmes, Lancaster, and we're right back in Vegas again. So, and then it seems like no amount of time at all, and we're heading to China for the first World Cup. It's crazy how time flies.
Just a whirlwind existence for guys like you.
Yeah.
I don't envy it though. I've done my time of 250,000 air miles a year, and I can tell you it gets a little old.
Yeah, I'm ready to spend some time at home.
I don't blame you one bit. Well, for more questions, just go ahead and email us, podcast@eastontp.com. Thank you, Sammy, for sending in your question here on the Easton Podcast.